Well, all right. I think we can go get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first kind of collaborative coaching webinar, thanks to NAECAD, mostly, and Connor Alney. If you don't know me, my name is David Stone. I am the commissioner of competition for high school, middle school, and our youth winter circle. But you won't hear too much from me. You'll be hearing mostly from Connor, who is the Director of Membership Success for NAECAD, so the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors. Fun fact, Connor used to be a coworker, used to actually be the HSEL commissioner, and I won't steal too much of your thunder if you want to bring some stuff up, but did a lot of cool things with his time at HSEL, including like the HSEL Roadshow. Did a whole Build Esports Labs campaign. He's been around the block, and he's doing really cool stuff. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Connor and just enjoy. I will be an audience member for once at these webinars, so it's going to be a great time. Thanks, Connor.
Yeah, thanks, David. Welcome everyone. Can you all just like drop a hi or something in the chat so I know that we're talking to real people to make me feel like make it feel like a real lecture. Just want to say hi to everyone. Awesome. So I used to be the commissioner of HSEL, so this is really cool to be back and getting to talk to HSEL coaches and participants to level up your coaching game. So as David said, since I left HSCL, what I've been spending the last 2 years on is essentially really diving into the world of esports coaching. So I joined a group called NAECAD. We're an organization that is purely exists as a professional development association for esports. So we're kind of unique in the sense that we don't try to do anything with tournaments or tournament hosting or anything like that. We're purely here to try to learn from what's going on in the space and try to bring that all together to deliver professional development to people like yourselves. So we focus on both training for coaches and directors. We have a number of different ways that we deliver that, whether it be through recorded sessions online, through live events, or through stuff like this, like webinars. So we do a couple events a year in person, and hopefully, you all be excited or invited out to those. But enough about that. Today, we're going to be diving into really what you can do as an esports coach. In particular, you're someone who maybe has had a team for a season or two and really wants to know what you should be focusing on to be a better coach for your students. So we're going to go through 5 key components for that today. We only have an hour. Full disclosure, this is usually a much longer session, so I've cut it to an hour, but I still think it's going to be incredibly valuable and enough to get you guys really thinking, and carry you through the rest of the year. So the main objective today is to review those 5 key components to be able to take those home and implement in your program and just your mindset of being a coach. And obviously that's my way, and my secondary objective is to create a more impactful student experience at your program. But, I can't reach your students without talking to you, and ultimately you're the one who creates that experience. So hopefully today I give you some sort of insight that you can take home, and at the end of the day everyone wins. So I'm going to start by telling you what the 5 components are, and then we're going to do a little exercise before we get into them. So what we're going to be learning today is from, like I said, we've been developing this for a really long time, and these are basically the best practices broken down into 5 sections of what esports coaches do to run a proper team and program. So the first is establishing proper expectations, then team building, then practice planning, setting the pace, and recognizing results. Those are going to be what we learn today. So before we go into any of this, what we're going to do is challenge you all to, I'm going to pull up the chat just in case if questions pop in. Right now, we're going to be transitioning into putting the hat on as you are a coach. You are here to be the best coach possible. Maybe you serve more as an advisor for the club, maybe you're already coaching, but I want everyone to funnel into the mindset that you are here to be the best coach possible. And that starts with establishing what your coaching philosophy is. Your coaching philosophy is essentially a maybe 1 to 2 sentence motto that you have for yourself that drives your decision making as a coach. There's no one way to be a coach. The only wrong way to be a coach is to not have one of these. So, this is something that we're going to work through real quick to just get your brain turning, and maybe something you come back to since we only have an hour, uh, to at least start thinking about and build for yourself, because it's going to guide a lot of your decisions for the next stuff. So the first thing I want you to do, you're all on a computer, so you can pull up something to write down with. Um, but we're going to kind of build your coaching philosophy if you don't have it. And these are some simple questions to ask yourself to develop it. So the first question is, what are your core values? And the best way to find these, and what I do in the in-person exercise, is uh, you write down any of the words that come to your mind that when you first heard about esports, or when you decided to take on the task of growing your esports program, there were probably some words that stuck out to you. Whether it be, teamwork, communication, social emotional learning. There's a bunch of words that get thrown out there that are all valuable things to teach kids. But, as I'm talking through this, just write down some of the first words that you think of when it comes to why you decided to take on esports. These are, words that you want to instill into the kids in your program, that you think esports is very valuable because I'm going to teach X, Y, and Z to these kids. So as you're writing down those words and thinking about it, your coaching philosophy is going to be a combination of what does the experienced kids need to get out of this, but also, why are you here? Why do you want to be a coach? So I give an example here: to use competition to teach work ethic and leadership. Coaching can mean a number of different things to a number of different people. And ultimately, you're all going to be on a spectrum of how highly competitive you are versus how maybe you're more focused on the community aspect. And it's a decision you have to make as a coach. This is esports, it's competitive gaming. So you want to have a level of competitive integrity and pursuit of winning a championship and that level. But maybe you're not all the way to the scale where like competition's all that you care about. So there's going to be a spectrum. And so this is kind of where this question comes in of, on that spectrum, why is it that you're here to be a coach? We got some great words dropped in the chat. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Sportsmanship, mindset growth, learning skills. These are all really great words. And basically what our coaching philosophy is you take some of these words that you really want to resonate with kids, combine it with why you decided to be a coach, and you can kind of come up with your own little guiding light, if you will, your own motto for why you are a coach. And we call it your coaching philosophy. So I wish we could spend more time on it, but we can't. But ultimately, I wanted to give you guys a couple examples I've heard from really talented esports coaches who've adopted this sort of model. So, for example, there was one collegiate coach who was their team won the Rocket League championship a few years back. He was really in the mindset of his philosophy was we score first is what he would say. There's other ones in here. We don't win or lose, we improve. That's a common one that people resonate with. I don't care if you made a mistake. I care if you gave it your all. We don't give up. We don't back down. We fight to the end. So you can see they're all on the spectrum of how competitive you want to be as a coach. But having this guiding light and why we start with this is important, because as we work through this, there's a lot of decisions that you need to make as a coach and as yourself. And I'm not going to be able to answer that for you. I can just give you the outline for what you should be thinking about. So that's a quick crash course into coaching philosophy. If you don't have one, I really suggest you take 5 to 10 minutes after we're done talking here today to think about what yours is, and just try to adopt that for the year and think through that lens for the rest of the year, because I think it'll really help you out. So with that, we are going to dive into what is typically the foundations for your student handbook. If you already have a student handbook for your program, think about this next chapter as ways that you can improve it. If you don't already have a student handbook, you can steal basically all of this to put and be the building blocks for your student handbook. And if you don't have one, definitely have one. So the first thing that we're talking about is establishing expectations. This is first because it is incredibly important, and it is the number one overlooked thing for new coaches at every level. I've seen this be the mistake at the professional level, the college level. I made this mistake when I used to be a college coach, and at the high school level. And that is we leave way too much into the gray area. And this especially happens when your program has been running more like a club where there isn't any specific coaching and it's really just a place where everyone gets together to game. And in that environment, there's not a black and white set of rules and expectations. But the problem becomes it's really hard to build off of that. And you can't really build the program you want until you establish the foundation that you expect for all of them. So we're going to go into all of the different categories that you should have clear rules outlined from the beginning. And if you don't have it now, work on it so that next season or next year, your handbook has these very clear outlines and expectations. And I'll talk about why they hurt as we go through here. So the first one is, and they kind of go in order of maybe obvious to harder. So academics. I'm sure you guys have thought about this or talk about this, having a minimum GPA to participate, maybe a level of school attendance or grade checks is required. I'm guessing most of you, if not all of you, have this. I am curious while I'm talking, what if you have a GPA requirement? Can you drop it in the chat of what your guys's is? I've seen this anywhere from like 2.0. Some programs had it up at like a 3.0 or higher. I think there was a private school that had like a 3.5. So curious if you guys are all in that range or not. Yeah, 2.5 sounds about right. So good that we're already setting that at, step one of setting expectations is done. So now you go a little more complicated and you go into time commitment. This is where I see a lot of people fall off, and I'll tell you the drawbacks of it. Setting a very clear how many hours you practice every week, how many games you have and when those games are, and any sort of additional time commitments that you might have in this is a foundational step number 2 for your program. And the reason is most conflicts I've seen in the high school classroom come from players having different, maybe one kid's in band, one kid works a part-time job, one kid only does esports, and they have all these different things going on that are outside of maybe your control. And the only way to make sure that they are all on the same page is by setting this commitment up front. And what it'll do is make hard decisions easier later on. For example, one of the things when we get into team building that is very common is I actually shadowed a team for like a whole season last year. And the biggest issue that came with that team was 2 of the kids on the team, this was all they did. And they were really excited about it and they really wanted to get better at esports. 3 of the kids had other things going on and didn't have as much time to commit to it. And what ended up happening was the 2 kids who were the really passionate esports kids weren't happy. And I think one of them didn't even try back out for the team next year because it wasn't what they expected. They thought they were signing up for a team that was going to, practice 3-4 times a week, that were there to improve. And they were only ever able to get the whole team together maybe once a week to practice. And that's not what they wanted. So it drove a divide into that team. Now, ultimately, again, this is up to you and what you're going to set. But what this does is avoids those difficult decisions. If your requirement is we practice 3 times a week and then we play our matches on Friday or whatever it is, and you have a kid that comes to you and says, I really want to be on this team, but I can't make all 3 of those practices, what do you do? Well, if it's laid out in your handbook that you have to make all 3, that kid might not be able to play that season. And while that's really unfortunate for that kid, it makes the experience for the rest of the team better. Now, obviously, we want to try to create an environment that has as many people in it as possible, but I'm just trying to throw an example out there of situations where it really does help to have this outlined from the beginning. So vice versa, if your requirement is only you practice once a week and you compete once a week, those kids who want to practice 4 or 5 times a week, you've now avoided that situation as well, saying, hey, from the very beginning, I told you guys we were only practicing once a week. So if they're upset that they're not practicing more, that's on them because that wasn't the commitment that was expected out of the team. So it's just clarifying that up front is very important. So then you take it one step further, and feel free if you have questions or anything to drop it in the chat. You take that one step further, and then you go into tryouts and competition. This is another area that I see very few programs actually have like a clean cut outline for how this works, and it can really bother students. Mainly being, how do I get on varsity, or how do you pick the people that are on the varsity team? And so having some sort of outline or tryout process of how that works is really important. And the more complicated that process gets probably depends on your ability to evaluate those games. So it's okay if it's relatively vague at the beginning, but you just need to be able to answer a question to a kid who wants to make it on varsity. How do they get there? Having some sort of process there is important. So then we go on to financial commitments. This one, at the beginning of the season is very important, but the main one I want to talk about here is fundraisers and really drive home the fact that every single one of you should plan at least one fundraiser for your program, and you should outline that in the beginning of the year. There's plenty of things that you can do or accomplish with your team through fundraising, but more important than the money, and we'll talk about it a little later, is fundraising is also a really, really good opportunity to for team building for the team to get them out there doing something together, but also for the community to know that esports exists and know that what you guys are doing. So I think we're going to talk about that later though. So those are obviously really important to lay out. And then parent expectations. So this is one that I see very few programs doing, and if you guys do this, congrats. But I've seen a lot of programs build esports labs in places where their team plays from, and then they compete together during game days, but they don't ever invite the parents to come watch. So they built a place for the people to be able to play and watch the games, but then they don't invite anyone to come watch. It's really, if you want esports to be treated like any other sport, you need to act like it's any other sport. And in every other sport, when it is game day, parents are invited to attend, friends are invited to attend. It's such an important step that's going to be what takes esports to the next level, which is developing out the spectator component. And I know not everyone has arenas, but if you are able to have your team play together and set up an observer with a TV, taking that extra step to invite the parents out is super important. If you can't do that, that's okay. But laying out the parent expectations in the beginning of the year is very important. At a minimum, you should always have and plan an information meeting with the parents. So usually this is done right at the beginning of the season or a little bit before it to make sure that parents are on board with all of these expectations. And then you end the year with an awards night where you recognize your students, but also, again, invite the parents. And I'm going to keep saying parents because they are a huge part of growing, your high school team out is parental support is very important. So expectations on that. And then the hardest one to take a little time to build out is conduct and discipline. So there's going to be, no matter what, a time where a student does something they shouldn't have done on your program. And the more prepared you are with setting expectations on how those things work, the easier those decisions get to be made for you, even if it's a hard decision in the sense of maybe your star player has to be benched or kicked off the team or whatever. You at least know the right and wrong answer to the situation. So, for example, tardiness and absences are something I see completely slacked off in esports. And whereas in traditional sports, they don't let that stuff fly. If you're late to 3 practices, you're out for you're not playing. If you miss 3 practices, you're off the team. Like other sports are very, very strict on some of these things, where esports programs don't really hold players accountable sometimes. And it's a huge missed opportunity to really be teaching a student about responsibility. And one of the main reasons why kids learn a lot from being and participating in sports comes down to this and setting proper guidelines of, hey, you missed a practice, therefore you're not playing this week. Those lessons are really important, especially, at all levels. It doesn't matter, but at the high school level, the lessons we're teaching are far more important than winning. Like what the kids are going to take away from this experience is ultimately what they learned. It's not, did we go out of our way to make sure our star player could play even though it broke the rules? That's no good. Um, so thinking through some of those conduct and discipline situations that you're going to run into and having a clear cut answer, very, very important. So, with that, hopefully that all makes sense. We're going to start diving more into the day to day of actually coaching the teams. So that's kind of all the stuff you should set up going into the season. Now we're going to start talking about actually working with your students. And the first step that I want to get across is the importance of team building. I mentioned that I shadowed a team this past year through an entire season. And one of the big things that stuck out for why this team wasn't improving was we were like 5-6 weeks deep into the season, and it was clear that the kids were not comfortable with each other at all. They still didn't really talk, didn't really want to, interact much, and it was clear that this team was never going to progress until, forget the game, we just get all these kids doing something together to open up and just be friendly with each other. And you might not have that problem. You might have the opposite problem where a team came in and they're all friends already and they're too rowdy. But this works either way. So at the beginning of the season, especially, team building should be part of your practice. But more so, you can have days that are strictly team building where you're not even touching a computer. Because when you think about yourself as a coach and what you're doing here for coaching esports, your job isn't necessarily to take individual players and make them the best, most talented individual player they can be. They're going to have to develop most of that on their own and on their free time and how much they play the game. Your job is to take whatever individuals fill your classroom and build them into a team. That's step one. And so if it takes a whole week for you guys to not even play the game, but go out and do some of these team building exercises to get them to the point where you can actually get them communicating and talking, then that's what you got to do. Some it'll go faster, some it won't. But that is always going to be step one. They have to want to work together before you can really get into the critiquing the gameplay and developing higher level strategy. So one of the really fun ways to do this is improv. If you have ever done improv or worked with it, you'll know that improv warm-ups and they have like improv games. It's a super fun way to make everyone uncomfortable, but uncomfortable together and try to get them out of their friends or out of their comfort zone. And then obviously if you just Google team building, there's a bunch of different team building things that you can do. I listed a couple in here. I'll go over them quickly. And then I threw fundraising back in here again. It's a really good way to get everyone working together on something that's not the game. So this is a fun one that you can do with your whole esports program or just a team. It's called Minefield. Essentially, what you do is you'll have an object in the middle of the room that will be the prize or the trophy or whatever. And then you'll split people into two teams. And each team will have one person and then you lay down a bunch of random stuff on the floor. So you have something in the middle that they're trying to get to, and then you might have a desk or a chair or just some random stuff that's blocking their way from getting to that prize. So that you have one team member who's blindfolded, and then another team member whose job it is to, they can only say right, left, forward, or backward, and they have to communicate to that person to get them to the middle first before the other person gets there. So it's a super fun game. It's super easy to set up in a classroom or at a park or outside or whatever, but it's a really good way to start forcing communication that is going to be helpful in esports. So this is a quick game, nothing to do with esports. Get the team together, have some fun, break down some of that, break the ice with the players, and have them, communicate. This is really this is I should have taken this off, a difficult one to explain online. But this is just another communication game. And then this is one that is more of an exercise. So especially, if you want to have a day where the team just works out together, having exercises that involve the team working together can be a really helpful way to do team building. So this is just simply, we all did this in PE growing up, where you all run in a line and then the person in last place has to run to the front. Then you all run together. Coach blows a whistle, the person in the back runs to the front. it's a good way to get everyone working out, but then also having them encourage each other and work together as they go. So these are just a couple examples. There's plenty of team building. My point here is not to teach you every single team building exercise, but to get you to implement it into your esports lesson plans, because it's a very important first step. So now that we've gone through that, we're going to talk about how that works into the overall planning of esports practices. Because yes, you should be planning practice. A lot of people don't. So if you do this already, you're miles ahead of what's average right now. But practice planning is an incredibly important step because it's essentially the difference between why a kid is even in your program or not. When you think about being an esports coach and having an esports team, you should be delivering. And the reason you're joining that team is to have an experience you wouldn't get on your own. If I can go home and play video games online and play scrims online and play in tournaments online all by myself, why do I need to be part of a team? Why do I sign up for a team? Well, the difference is you as a coach and what you're able to deliver during practice. Practice should be a time where they're learning and developing things that they cannot do on their own. So, how do you do that? Well, here is the basics for every single esports practice that's out there. And I just realized for some reason something got deleted off of here. But that's okay. We'll work through it. So I started with the team building. Team building is a really fun one. You can phase it out as you get further into the season, but especially early on, you should have a 1 day, maybe a week that you're doing just team building, but you should start with 10 minutes of some sort of exercise or team building. It just breaks the ice for the team, gets them talking, gets them in a good mood, and ultimately it gets them to have fun. Having fun is an important first step in getting this all developed. So do some team building in the beginning. Next, what we found is the best practice is doing VOD review next. So before they actually get settled in onto their games or on their computers or whatever, you go through a quick VOD review. If it's the beginning of the season, you don't have any film, that's okay. But you start with VOD review. And what's most important here is the preparation work. So as a coach, you should have some sort of VOD recorded and ready to review. And as a team, you don't need to necessarily run and dictate that entire VOD review. But what you should be doing is making sure that you identify the main takeaway that you're trying to get through during this VOD review practice. You're not trying to focus on the entire game and break down every single thing that the team did wrong. It'll be too long, too time consuming. No one's attention span works for that. You should aim for a maximum of 30 minutes VOD review, but honestly, you can do it in about 15 minutes where you're picking up on one key thing that the team is going to need to improve on. Sometimes 1 to 3, but mainly just one. And the second thing that I don't like is when people try to do and critique mechanical mistakes during a VOD review. What I mean by that is you guys lost a round because one player lost a 1v1 gunfight or something. His gun skill is not what you're going to be focusing on there. Maybe his positioning was wrong. Maybe he didn't hear a call out, but you shouldn't be focusing on the mechanics necessarily that he's doing wrong. The only exception is like if he had like an ability that he was supposed to use and he didn't, like it was part of the play that he had to smoke this site off and he didn't do it. That's fair to call out, but you don't want to focus too much on the individual part of the VOD review. You want to focus on, as a team, what were we consistently doing wrong, and then highlight that so you can take that into your practice. So crash course on how to do that. People try to get way too long and way too technical during it. You're not focusing on mechanics. You're focusing on the team. So then we go into drills. And this is where, so we'll go drills, modified games, and scrimmages. Those are 3 different things. A lot of the standard out there right now is people talk about, okay, you do VOD or film review, and then you scrim, and that's all they do. But it's much more complicated than that, in the sense of scrimming isn't really just the end all be all of scrims. And a lot of times you maybe can't get scrims. and people don't scrim correctly anyway. So there's more you can do as a coach than just saying throwing them into a scrim. Because again, we want to deliver an experience of practice and training that they can't get at home. And they can play matches at home all day long. In fact, most of them probably play too many of them. So we want to think about what's in a controlled environment. I have this team here. What can I do to make sure they're actually developing as a team? Oh, okay. I see my mistake now. So what you can do is you can develop a set of drills and then also what we call modified games. So drills are focusing on one of two categories, mechanics or communication. Modified games are your ability to focus on developing attitude, teamwork, and awareness. Together, those 5 categories make up the 5 categories of improvement across every single esport: mechanics, communication, attitude, teamwork, and awareness. If you're a coach who doesn't know any of these games or the games that you're playing, these are the 5 categories you can at least break down to your players so that they can self-identify where they're struggling the most. Rocket League's the easiest to talk about when it comes to drills versus modified games. So drills are easy in Rocket League because you have what's called training packs. If you're not familiar, training packs are essentially built into Rocket League where you can go in and focus on a very specific thing that player needs to develop. Aerials or different defense strategies, whatever the case may be. It works on developing those mechanics. Communication drills can be a little bit different, but they can be kind of fun. So these are drills that are focused just on call outs and development. Sometimes this might be as straightforward as a player needing flashcards on different maps of where to call out for students. This can also be turned into something fun. So an example I have here for a Call of Duty session where we were developing communication, we had 5 players, 4 on a team, where none of them were allowed to use their gun. They could only use their melee attack, and they tried to, win against the one player on the other team who was allowed to use their gun. And the only way you're able to accomplish this is if you're all able to communicate so well that you don't even have to use your weapon to be able to identify where this player's at, get your team around them, and take them out. Questions around communication drill for Rocket League. So this is going to come down in Rocket League. Communication is all about, this could be a whole hour. So typically in Rocket League, the way you communicate is you have, if you're playing threes, you have first man, second man, and third man. So 1, 2, and 3. And in Rocket League, the first man is the person that is basically going to hit the ball. Second man is the person that's lining up to be able to potentially, play off of where that player passes or hits the ball. And then third is your backup defense type of person. And they're all constantly rotating and changing. So this might be going a little too high level. I'm sorry if it is. But with that, the way you drill Rocket League communication is you go into just your team on an empty map and you go through rotations. So on defense, let's say the enemy team's trying to score, you set up a rotation of where first man's supposed to be, second man's supposed to be, third man's supposed to be, and then you have them play through those rotations, and you go, you have them kind of drill those rotations. So that's a offense. On offense, you would do the same thing. Where if you have the ball going, you kind of design drills and you have them rotate through where they should be rotating. That's how you would do communication. Sorry, that was a good question, but a hard one to do without having the game up in front of you. But hopefully that helped. So then drills are very specific on developing a mechanic. Modified games is where you can have some fun with what your team is doing. So this is similar to scrimmages, except what you're going to do is you develop or you change the rule set depending on what kind of development you're looking for. So attitude, this is a really fun one that a lot of coaches don't think about. Think about how different your team plays when you guys are losing a bunch or way down in score versus when you're up a bunch. the vibes are completely different, the attitude's completely different, right? And that's what we mean by attitude, is how the team is playing. So one of the most fun ways you can drill attitude is by playing a scrimmage, whether it's in-house or against another team, or you break up. Let's say you have enough players, maybe you have to do a 2v2 or whatever, but you force certain players in a huge deficit where the other team already has 4 goals or 5 goals, and you tell them play from there. And it's a really great way to put yourself into situations that you're going to run into on a real game day, and you want to practice them. If you did traditional sports, this will start to make sense for you, because that's all what you do in drilling in traditional sports is you're trying to prepare and practice for situations you might find on game day. We have an advantage in esports because we can do scrims and basically replicate game days whenever we want, versus in traditional sports, it's not as easy to do that. But modified games are how you do it. So another example that is more straightforward, for teamwork, if you're playing Valorant, let's say, just playing a game where every single person has to focus on retaking A site or trying to plant the bomb on A site. Just drilling these situations that you know are going to happen on game days, but you want the kids to get some reps in a controlled environment. So that's all we talk about, or that's what I mean when we talk about modified games. So awareness is another example. Awareness is an incredibly difficult thing to develop, but there are ways you can kind of drill it during modified games. One of the most straightforward is you run a play with your students, and then once the play kind of maybe falls apart, or a player is in a bad situation, you pause the game and you have them talk through what's going through in their mind. So where do you think the enemies are going to be? What information did you gather about what's going on? That's one of the best ways you can do it, but it is a difficult one. So those are some examples of modified games. Hopefully this makes sense, the difference between drilled and modified games. And this is where you can have the most fun as a coach. These are things that you can set up and work with your students on to develop just fun things that you can do during practice where they're still learning. If you have a team and a B team, and the A team's really good and the B team's not so great, you can still have them scrim each other in a modified game where the A team has to focus on pistols, or has to has some sort of handicap, and it'll be fun for everyone. Or maybe in Rocket League, it's as simple as a 2v3 type of situation, or something where you can still have fun with all of the kids, but you're forced in a situation that they're going to learn and come out ahead. So that's what I mean by all that. Scrimmages is the most straightforward. The one piece of advice I'll give you is that people get wrong is focusing too much on winning during scrims. Your goal is not to win, but to improve. And what I mean by that is you should go into each scrimmage with the idea of what you're trying to work on as a team, whether it's a new team comp, whether it's a new rotation strategy, whether it's whatever. And your goal should be to stick to that strategy. Even if you're losing, you'll see players start to develop habits during scrims that aren't the healthiest, because they're just trying to focus on winning. And if they're trying a new strategy and it's not working, they start doing bad habits that they're not going to get away with against a better team. So just important to drill the idea and remind your students that the goal is not to win a scrimmage, but to focus on improvement of whatever you guys talked about. So again, this is a part of a much longer talk, so I'm sorry if I'm going through some of this relatively quick, but again, my goal was just to brief you guys on all of this, and then you'll be sent this so that you can take it and implement it and throughout the year. So now that we've set expectations, we've planned practices, now I want to talk about you as the coach and what it is your job to do every single day that you guys have practice, or anytime you're with your students. I list out some things here, but as a coach, it's your job to motivate all of your players to give every game their all, to establish a clear culture that rewards the values and attitude you want to see, and this is a disclaimer: rewarding those values is inspiring, ignoring those values is detrimental. So What do I mean by setting the pace? This is essentially your words and actions and how incredibly important they are as a coach. First mistake I see all the time: greeting your players and kicking off practice. So many people do not start practice correctly. And what I mean by that is I've seen a bunch of practices where there's a coach there. Kids will walk in, the coach might be playing video games in the corner or working on something else, seeming slightly disinterested in what's going on. The players come in, they sit down, they get on the computers, they start warming up, and then they're kind of like, all right, what are we doing today, coach? It's a terrible way to start it. What you're basically saying is your students that this isn't like your priority. Versus imagine walking into a room where practice begins, the coach gets up, grabs the whole team, huddles, says, "This is what we're going to go over today. Then we're going to do this. Then we're going to do this." Leaves, some inspirational words or just some energy into the room of, I was really proud with what we saw yesterday. Like we're going to get back after it today and do work on this and this, and then we're going to end off with this. We're going to have a really great practice. All right, everyone. Like, all right, maybe do a handshake, clap, whatever, something to show the kids this is your focus, this is your time to work with them, and you get the energy pumping in the room. If you don't do that, it's very difficult to get that energy going. The next thing I see coaches do very wrong is they don't talk to the kids. So in a traditional sport, you would never see this. There is always a coach who is talking to the team before a match, halftime, and after a match to try to get them pumped up. And it's just as important in esports. So pep talks before and after games are really where you're able to shape their minds and deliver, a value as a coach. Even if you know nothing about the games, again, you can change their mindset going into a game to try to get them excited about it. And then after a game is when you are able to make the most impact on that kid. Whether they won or lost, they're not going to remember in 20 years which games they won, which games they lost, whatever. But how they felt afterward and the words that you give them can 100% stick with them for the rest of their life. So it's an incredibly important moment to be able to take time to get them together and talk to them about what happened. If you just lost a hard game, but you saw something you liked, for example, they just lost a game, but you could tell they were working their way, like they never gave up all the way through it. That's something important to tell them at the end of the game. The game ends, they're hanging their heads. You get them all together. You go, hey guys, listen up. I don't want to see any of you guys holding your head down. That was the hardest I've seen you guys work all year. You guys were fighting to the end. They came out on top this time, but I saw, each one of you, landed on the line that game. Whatever it is, it's an important aspect of coaching. The next step on here is showing off your culture. And I'll give you an example of this that is one that stuck with me. So I was a wrestler in high school. That was my main sport. And when I walked into the wrestling room freshman year, knowing nothing, weighing like 90 pounds, I walk in, and what you see when you walked into our wrestling room is on all three of the walls, it says conceive it, believe it, achieve it. And then on the fourth wall was painted on the wall every single person's name who has ever made it to state or placed at state in wrestling. This is in Iowa, so wrestling is really important. That was the most inspirational thing I could see when I walked into that room, because I did not want to leave that program until I got my name painted on the wall. And it made me work that much harder to try to make it to state, because you could see what was the culture of the room was on the walls. Conceive it, believe it, achieve it. I still remember it. And it's been 13 years or whatever. And so how can you do that in your program? Well, it starts with the coaching philosophy I talked to you about. What is it that you want to instill in these kids? What are those couple of words that you really want to resonate with them? And with esports, we can get kind of creative with this. One example is you can set a desktop lock screen or background for the desktop to an image or something that you really want to resonate with the kids, some words, inspiration, whatever. This could be if you're completely online, however you guys communicate. If it's through Discord, you could have a pinned image and message at the top of it. There's a number of ways you can get creative with your program and how it's laid out. to try to make sure you're instilling this idea of what your culture is and why they're there. It's an important step that's overlooked. The next side of this is kind of the things that we've talked about, where if you're able to implement this, it's really how you build your culture. So the first one is making the tough decisions. And what I mean by that, most of the time in esports, what that comes down to is making the decision to bench or kick a player off the team who is the better player, but they are either doing something inappropriate, or they're toxic, or they're consistently showing up late to practice, or whatever bad habit they have is the first and most important opportunity you have to develop your culture by what decision you make there. If you allow that toxic player to stay on the team, you're telling everyone else on the team that I don't care how you act as long as we win. If you bench that player right off the get-go, or you talk to them and they have to go, you are now telling the entire team, I don't care how good you are, you're going to act right if you're on this team. Hopefully we all lean towards that direction. But it is a difficult thing to do, especially because sometimes the kids aren't on board with the decision. Sometimes the kids just want to win, and they're going to be upset with you if you take away their best player. But those are the moments where your culture is built, and those are the moments where you're going to actually make an impact on them by, making the decision you make and explaining it to them why this had to happen. It's those are when culture is built, when you make the tough decisions. The final two here, again, it's built off your coaching philosophy and a little bit of showing off your culture, is you need to have a clear vision for the team, and you need to have a clear vision for the program. And so they're slightly different in the sense of clear vision for the team is typically going to be more competitive driven. This is looking at the team and where they're currently at and trying to decide where you want them to end up, and pushing them to do so, whether that's, making it to playoffs, making it to state, making it, to HSEL nationals, or winning HSEL nationals. How high you want to aim, completely up to you and where your program's at. But having something for those kids to be pushed towards is really important. Clear vision for the program is more about, like we talked about in the beginning, the overall idea of what you're trying to accomplish with your esports program and how you can make sure that all the teams are working together to fulfill on that promise, whether it's through fundraisers, whether it's through, community development, hosting their own events, whatever. Having an idea for the broader picture, very, very important. So that goes through most of that. And I really want to kind of bring it all together into the final step. If you've done all of that, for how you can make sure that esports lives on and resonates with these kids much past when they graduate or when they stop playing the game, because it'll happen at some point. And recognizing results during their process of development is one of the best ways you can teach them about hard work and teamwork and determination, that they'll carry with them for the rest of their life. So on the left-hand side here are things that you can do and actively recognize. On the right side are kind of ways that you can, like I talked about with when you're talking to the team before or after a match, they're things that you can focus on to get their mindset right. So team accomplishments is the very first obvious one. Making the varsity team a big deal. Varsity is a big deal in pretty much every single sport, and you should have something built into your program for how you recognize actually making it to varsity. Some teams will do like a different jersey. Some teams will do like you don't get your gamer tag on the jersey unless if you're on varsity. Some sort of signifier that you're on varsity and can make it like an actual accomplishment is really cool. Obviously, playoffs, state nationals, anything you can do to, hey, this was a really cool accomplishment. Let's get a banner. Let's get a trophy. Let's get a plaque on the wall. Let's just take a picture. Anything you can do to highlight, you guys worked all season to do this, and I'm proud of you for doing it. Another fun one you can do in esports is in-game accomplishments. So when players rank up, they learn a new character, they learn a new role, these things that are actually very easy to track in esports that aren't so easy to track in other sports are a really cool opportunity for you to be able to talk about that kid. Whether this is, like in my example, like if you have an esports arena on the wall, you have a banner with all of the kids who have ever reached top rank in a certain game. That's pretty cool. But it could also just be pulling a kid aside one day and practice and go, "Hey, I saw on your tracker that you made it to gold this season. I'm proud of you." You know, both are good. Ultimately, what you're doing is reinforcing that hard work pays off. So those are really cool examples you can do in esports. And the final one is an awards night. Pretty much every single traditional sport will do this. And I really hope that you guys implement it this year if you're not already doing it. Taking a night after playing a whole season and going through this whole process to invite the family out, have all the kids get together and hand out some awards is just a really cool way to cement your culture, to cement to the parents that this is a real sport, and to show off, to the school and to the kids that this was something, worth celebrating. So, very, very important step that you should integrate into your program. And then on the right side, like I said, these are 3 examples of when you see this happen. And the reason I put these here is these are always good examples to take a moment to tell the team after you recognized it. So the first one I already kind of gave an example for, which is fighting to the last minute. This is not giving up once you're down a couple goals or, you're way behind. And even if you end up losing that match, just showing that determination and telling the kids you're proud of them for that is a really easy opportunity to reinforce that hard work culture. Recovering from a loss is one that a lot of times coaches forget is like such a amazing opportunity to impact your kids when it's a, let's say, best of 3 and they lose the first one and win the next 2. That recovering from that first loss and reinforcing that is really important, because at some point, no matter how good the team is, they're going to come into a moment that they're going to be down, and building that attitude shift of, oh, well, last time we were down, we won, so this time it's nothing to worry about. Who cares if we're down a map? Who cares if we're down 2 maps? We've been here before, we can do it again and win. But they won't remember that unless if you reinforce it into your head, into their head, that, they can do this. They recover from losses all the time. It's not a big deal. It's just a good opportunity to get in front of them. And then the final one that is really good for you as a coach to build your confidence as well as the team's confidence is when you drill something or you do a modified game to practice a situation and you see them actually pull it off during game day. Why that's important to highlight is it shows them the importance of the process of practicing and developing with the team. A lot of these kids have never been on another sports team, and it's not something that they're used to seeing. And so it's really important to call out when you practice something, they do it on a game day and it works. And it works because they put in the time to practice. That's a very valuable real world skill of, hey, spend some time practicing this thing and it will pay off in the long run. Very, very important part of the development process. If I didn't make it clear, do not overlook the importance of an awards night. It's an incredibly important way to round off the year. But I did a good job keeping this 1 hour. As you can probably see, and I could talk much longer on a lot of these, but I wanted to make sure I got through all of it. And hopefully this was a really good crash course for you guys into what you can be looking into and doing to be a better esports coach. If you want to connect, please let me know. Like I said, at NAECAD, we do a lot of this stuff, and this is actually the foundation for a 5-hour certification that we'll be launching for esports coaching this year. So really, really cool part of it. And then also, if you guys are looking for, there was a big question around, if I don't know anything about esports, how do I implement kind of some of this? And also, how do I make sure esports coaching, my students are actually developing? And I do have a resource for that as well if you're interested. It's called Hard Carry. It's a guided journal for developing at esports. It's for your students, but it's also for coaches to be able to use as a blueprint for developing their sessions, especially if they don't know anything about the game.